Look at that. I am prompt today with my lesson on Second Kings 5, and that's because it's a long chapter. Good story, not so it's going to be an enjoyable lesson. So I'm glad you're joining me this morning, but there's a lot there. It's it's kind of a little short story about this character we have never heard of named Naaman and his encounter with Elijah, who has been the focus of our discussion. Hi, Sally and Dave. So let me get going. I'm going to pop right in, and you people ask questions. I have it in front of me here, and actually I'm going to put it on this tablet too, so I can not have to get up and touch and touch the screen. Remember, as I encourage you to interact with me today during this, um, that usually I'm like 30 seconds behind you or a minute behind you. So now I gotta like make this one not talk. All right, let me do that. Lois has joined us, it looks like here. Okay, there we go. Who's that? Harold? Hi, Harold. And there's a PDF that I put up on line at the group page here back about 11 o'clock or 10:30 or so. And I also sent it out to some of the people I know that come and visit us often on this lesson. And so I also will upload this to YouTube. That's a little bit of a process, so sometimes it's a little longer than just happening right away. So that's about all the housekeeping I have. And let's start reading. So we're reading first or Second Kings, the 5th chapter. So Naaman, the commander of the army of the king of Aram, was a great man and in high favor with his master, because by him the Lord had given victory to Aram. The man, though a mighty warrior, suffered from leprosy. Now the Arameans, on one of their raids, had taken a young girl captive from the land of Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. And she said to her mistress, "If only my lord were with the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy." So Naaman went in, and he told his lord, who's the king of Aram, just what the girl from the land of Israel had said. And the king of Aram said, "Go then, and I will send along a letter to the king of Israel." Notice that Samaria and Israel are kind of used interchangeably. The kingdom was actually called Israel, but the land, the geography, was called Samaria, so that's why the difference. So he was taken with him. This is Naaman now. Naaman took with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, 10 sets of garments, and he brought the letter to the king of Israel, which read, "When this letter reaches you, know that I have sent to you my servant Naaman, that you may cure him of his leprosy." And when the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes, and he said, "Am I God to give death or life, that this man sends word to me to cure a man of his leprosy? Just look and see how he's trying to pick a quarrel with me." There you go. So let's stop right there. So just a few things. Aram is the biblical name for what we would call Syria today. So Aram is the nation of Syria, and it's an enemy of Israel. It's an enemy. It's a similar sized country, similarly gifted, similar wealth, similar sized army, and so they kind of quarreled amongst themselves. So there were neighbors that had many different battles. Okay, so that's who Aram is, and Naaman is identified in our scripture, right? Our being, the scripture of God, to be a great man who God had given a victory to. That should sound weird to you because Naaman is not a Jewish person, not a believer in God. And what is he doing showing up in our scripture being called a great man, right? So whenever there's a defeat in scripture, hey, Don, welcome. I'm glad you're joining us. Whenever there's a defeat in Scripture, that of Israel, Scripture usually finds a way of telling us that it was God's plan that Israel got defeated because they had been screwing up, because they hadn't been faithful, because maybe God has some larger thing going on that we're in the midst of. I'm not really a big fan of this idea of God's plan being worked out like that in the midst of us. It goes against my ideas of free will and also my ideas of who God is and how God expresses love. Some of this stuff gets into bad things like why why did someone I love die, and there has to be a reason for that person dying in God's eyes, and I tend to think maybe there's no reason for that person dying in God's eyes. That doesn't mean that goodness can't come from death. In fact, we're death and resurrection people. So the person who died in the midst of that, God has a hope for us, I would say. But that God's like manipulating the world and having these things happen, it just doesn't sit well with my understanding of who God is. But definitely in the Old Testament and in these First and Second Kings, God is God is a God of good and God is a God of bad, the Jewish understanding. And so you'll see this where you'll have characters that aren't people of God punishing God's people for various reasons. And so Naaman is one of those characters, okay? He's got leprosy. When we say he's got leprosy, that could be the Hansen's disease, which is the really dangerous one, and you've seen these leper colonies, and islands and things like that where they set them aside. Often that's not what they're talking about. It's just kind of a general term in Scripture used for all skin diseases, everything from psoriasis to Hansen's disease. It feels like Naaman has something called, and I had the computer say this word out loud for me several times, vitiligo. Did I say that right? Which is something you've probably seen. It's that skin condition where your skin loses its pigment, and so you start getting patches of white all over your body, and you've probably seen this out in the world. And from the Scripture later, it fears that that's what it is. In almost all Middle Eastern cultures, and in Jewish cultures too, as part of the Middle East culture, it was socially a stigma. Okay, it meant at the very least that God wasn't blessing you and loving you, and in Jewish culture, it meant that you were unclean in some way. And there's no way for you to get clean because the uncleanness was this central part of you. Your body, your skin. No one could touch you because you were unclean there. So there you go. Interesting that a young girl speaks to this great man and has a good idea for him, right? And you're going to see a lot of Naaman being a great man and trying to figure out what that is. That's going to be a great theme of this whole story. So pay attention to that. The king says, yeah, I love you, Naaman. I want you to get healed. If this slave girl says there's somebody in Samaria who we don't know the name of yet, let's send him. So he sends a letter to the king of Israel. The king of Israel is probably, at this point, since Naaman won a great victory, we can assume the king of Israel is going to receive that call because he probably owes him somehow. So, me too. I don't know what that means, Lois. You're probably talking about God's plan and how God works through our lives. I betcha. Thanks, Lois. So he's going to send this, and the king of Aram sounds like a stand-up guy. He's not going to just order the king of Israel to heal his top general, his number one aide. He's going to send all sorts of presents and everything else and honor the king of Israel with all that. But you notice the king of Israel doesn't receive it like that. And you also notice the note doesn't say that there's a prophet that can heal him. It says you heal him. So the king of Israel, he freaks out because he is a faithless king. We said this over and over again. These Israeli kings, by the writers of 2 Kings, they think that they are faithless people. So if they have an opportunity to screw up their understanding of God, then they will. And this guy screws it up again. Then he doesn't know that Elijah's in his can heal him, right? And that's his primary script. A slave girl, for goodness sakes, knows this. And Aram, and here he's like 10 miles away from Elijah, and he doesn't know what to do about it. So, yeah, and so in the commentaries I read in preparation, they said the king is kind of comic relief for this whole story. Just because he's an idiot. It's like having Barney Fife. If you're old like me, you remember Barney Fife. It'd be like Sheriff Taylor being gone and Barney Fife's in charge. That's who these kings of Israel are, the way they tell the story. There you go. You ready? So, when Elijah, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, he sent a message to the king. Why have you torn your clothes? Let him come to me, that he may learn that there is a prophet in Israel. So Naaman came with his horses and chariots, and he halted at the entrance of Elijah's house. And Elijah sent a messenger to him, saying, Go, wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored, and you shall be clean. But Naaman became angry, and he went away, saying, I thought that for me he would surely come out and stand and call in the name of the Lord his God, and would wave his hand on the spot and cure the leprosy. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all these waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean? So he turned and he went away in a rage. But his servants approached and said to him, Father, if the prophet had commanded you to do something difficult, would you not have done it? How much more then when he said, all you have to do is wash and be clean? So Naaman went down and immersed himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God. And his flesh was restored, like the flesh of a young boy, and he was clean. Now you got to imagine this, right? So the first part of the story, right, starts out with Elijah, hitting Barney Fife on the head and saying, hey, dummy, I'm over here, just send him my way. I heard he's in the thing. Because, and this is probably a real true part of the story. I mean, when the king of Aram, who has just kicked your butt, sends their top general to the capital city to talk to the king of Israel, people know about it, okay? And when he's got a whole entourage of camels and shekels and gold and silver and all that stuff, people know about this. Elisha knew this was going on. He says, you're such an idiot. Well, God, how did God get such a miserable king for Israel at this point in our existence? So the king is none too happy, or only too happy, rather, to send Naaman over to Elisha. And this is what I got to imagine, right? Is I imagine this whole entourage that's in front of the palace in Samaria, right, of the king of Israel, moving now to probably a simple hut at Mount Carmel, where Elijah's living. Oh, Pat, I'm glad you found me. Pat, I forgot to send you the PDF today, too. I am so sorry. I am so sorry, Pat. I hope you found the PDF for today's. Welcome. Right, and so we sent him there, right? And where was I? Pat, you lost my train of thought. Oh, so imagine all this crap in front of the house, the small house, we're thinking, of Elijah. He's the greatest of the prophet. He's the head prophet, but he's probably not living in a palace. I don't think so. And then he doesn't even come outside the door, right? That's the story. Elijah doesn't even come outside the door. He sends one of his servants out there. Someone out there. Okay, yeah, go look at him. Go talk to him. See what he wants. But he knows what he wants. I mean, this guy is used to people coming and getting on their knees and saying, hey, you are a great man. First he's got to have a slave tell him how to get rid of his leprosy, and now he's got to be insulted. Thanks, Pat, for being understanding. Now he's got to be insulted by this prophet. This is not going well for Naaman so far, and so he's pissed. That's what his language is. When he says, I would have thought, the Hebrew makes it really clear that this guy's ego is a little bruised at this point. And his problems are, first, this honor-shame culture, right, Lois, that he's not getting any sort of respect at all here, and that's important. We have egos today, but in these honor-shame cultures, your status in the society was kind of your key identity in a way that we couldn't even understand. So So this guy is really getting dissed, and it is really making him mad. So that's one thing. The second thing is he's seen how healings go before, and Elijah isn't putting on a great show. Usually there's some dancing, there's some singing, there's some touching, some whooping, maybe some screaming, who knows? But go bathe yourself 7 times in a creek, right? I mean, that's what the Jordan is. It's a muddy creek. Really? I don't even want to walk into that thing. Don't you guys just dump all your sewage in there? I don't want to get in that creek. Right? This is not going well right now for Naaman. He doesn't want to go in that thing. I mean, if anything, we got big giant rivers up in Syria, a lot better than this thing. I'm not going to go in that. So Naaman leaves. He just leaves. He just goes, I'm done. Okay, this was stupid. Why did I ever listen to that slave girl? I'm done. Packs up his shekels and his gold and his camels and slaves and just turns around and heads back to Syria. And that could have been the end of the story, but another slave has to come up to this great man and say, hey, you know what? You're being kind of an idiot. How hard is it just to jump in the Jordan? I mean, you traveled all this way. Why wouldn't you do that right now? Why wouldn't you just, thanks, Sarah, for trying to help Pat. Pat, you can also find it on the group page, too, if you wanted to find it there. Why don't you just do that? You've done all this stuff. So pay attention to that, right? Because that's the second time now that this great man has had his comeuppance by a slave who's told him the right way to do. And this honor-shame culture, that's significant. We should notice that. We should notice that. Okay? Let's move on. So verse 15. So then he returned to the man of God, he and all of his company. And he came and he stood before Elijah and he said, now I know that there is no God in all the earth except in Israel. Please accept a present from your servant. But he said, this Elijah, as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will accept nothing. But Naaman urged him to accept, but Elijah refused. And then Naaman said, if not, please let 2 mule loads of earth be given to your servant. For your servant will no longer offer burnt offering or sacrifice to any god except the Lord. But may the Lord pardon your servant on one count. When my master goes into the house of Rimmon to worship there, leaning on my arm, and I bow down in the house of Rimmon, when I do bow down in that house, may the Lord pardon your servant on this one count. And Elijah said to him, go in peace. There you go. So, he washes in the river, cleaned like a baby, right? Does that sound like baptismal language to you? Definitely sounds like baptismal language to me. So he washes in the river, cleans like a baby, and the baptismal act brings him faith. I mean, that's kind of a Lutheran understanding of baptism right there. Right? He doesn't have faith in God before. He just wants to get this leprosy healed. But when he gets out of there, out of those waters, the muddy creek of the Jordan, and he's cleansed in a way that's not just physical, where this leprosy is washed off of him, but also spiritually, internally, and he's changed, and he comes before Elijah, and he wants to give Elijah a gift, because you know what? He's a wealthy guy. He's an important guy, and that's what important guys do. Right? They give gifts. So he wants to give a gift, and Elijah says, no, that's not what this is about. And he tries, and Elijah says no. And so then Naaman says something interesting. He goes, well, then let me take home two donkey loads full of soil so I can continue to worship the God of Israel back in Aram. Okay, so his kind of, maybe we'll call it an immature faith understanding, is that in order to worship God, I need the God of this land. I need this land over in my land. I need physically this land over in my land. That's what he's saying. and and Elijah doesn't teach him. No, you don't need to do that. That's kind of dumb. Uh, it feels like he says, okay, go fill. There's a bunch of sand over there. Go grab it. And then the second thing he does is he asks for forgiveness before he's even done something wrong because he knows he's going to screw this up. Because he's going to have to make compromises in order to be a follower of the God of Israel and Aram. Because he's the second-hand man over there in Aram. He's the right-hand man of the king. And there's no way for him to be the right-hand man of the king and not take part in these rituals that the king takes part for the worship of their primary god, which is, I think it's Hadad Raman, which is the god of thunder in this kind of Babylonian godhead. So he goes, you know what? I'm gonna have to bend the knee at the temple of Raman, and I don't want to do that because I know this new god that I've discovered, who I believe is the most powerful god, doesn't like that and isn't going to like that. One of the discussions, Lois, I'm going to interrupt there because Lois put up a comment. One of the discussions, Lois, is we often find comfort in things, that aren't necessary for our faith, but important for us personally. And it'd be nice for us to kind of remember some of those things now. So hopefully we'll do that at the end here. There's a lot of those discussion questions, but we'll pick a few of them and see. And so finally, he knows he's going to have to make compromises, and Elijah says, he doesn't say, okay, yeah, I get it. And he doesn't say, no, you can't do that. He just says, go in peace. Which kind of sounds like, work it out the best you can. Work it out the best you can. At least that's how I hear it. Yeah, I'm not going to tell you whether that's right or wrong, but I'm going to let you and God figure that out together. And that just sounds like good pastoral advice to me. So props to Elijah. So that'd be another good thing for us to talk about at the end too. Is what kind of compromises do we make every day in our faith, and how do we work out those compromises? Keep that in mind. Okay, so let's go on here. Last one. And the story kind of takes a weird turn right here, so if you're ready for this. So verse 19, it looks like here, 19b maybe. But when Naaman had gone from him a short distance, Gehazi, remember Gehazi from our stories the last few weeks? He's the head servant for Elisha. The servant of Elijah, the man of God, thought, my master, what an idiot, has let that Aramean Naaman off too lightly by not accepting from him what he offered. As the Lord lives, I will run after him and get something out of him. So Gehazi went after Naaman. And when Naaman saw someone running after him, he jumped down from the chariot to meet him and said, is everything all right? That's a real cool part, right? I mean, we have this Naaman big man that has this entourage, and he sees the king, and then he sees Elijah, and he's kind of pissed that Elijah doesn't come out of the house. And now after he's been born again in these waters, right? Born again in these waters, he's popping out of the carriage to talk to a slave. I mean, what's changed about this guy? Isn't God awesome? And Gehazi said, my master has sent me to say that 2 members of a company of prophets have just come to me from the hill country of Ephraim. Please give them a talent of silver and 2 changes of clothing. So Gehazi sees all this stuff that Naaman was going to give to Elijah going back up, and he knows that the prophets, the guild of prophets, they got to make a living here. So he's going to do Elijah a favor and just grab some of it, because Elijah's got his head in the clouds. He takes this God stuff way too seriously. Let's just be honest, right? So Gehazi needs to step in and be the pragmatist here. So Naaman, he's like excited to give these gifts away. Read verse 23. Oh gosh, please accept these 2 talents. He urged them, and he tied up 2 talents of silver in 2 bags with 2 changes of clothes, and gave them to 2 of his servants and carried them in front of Gehazi. So he even sent a parade to go there, right? This is exactly right. I mean, Naaman wanted to do something for Elijah, and now he's got his opportunity. And when he came to the citadel, Gehazi took the bags from the slaves and he stored them inside the citadel, kind of like a chapel, right? And then he dismissed those slaves and they left. And then Gehazi went and stood before his master. So what did Gehazi do? Right? Put him in a citadel? No. Did he take him to Elijah and said, Elijah, I got, no. Deceit upon deceit upon deceit, right? He hides him. That's what he does. He hides him. And he stood before his master, and Elijah said to him, Where have you been, Gehazi? And Gehazi answered, Why, your servant hasn't gone anywhere. But Elijah said to him, Did I not go with you in spirit when someone left his chariot to meet you? I love that line because it almost doesn't sound like Elijah's being upfront with him, right? He's kind of saying, yeah, you better not fool with me. I'm a man of God. I mean, probably 8,000 different servants said, Did you hear what Gehazi did, Elijah? But Elijah's going to play a little close to the vest on this one. Yeah, great connection, Harold. Great connection. Yeah, it does. Whenever money and religion get too closely connected, right, we start having problems. Greed is one of the 7 deadly sins, and that's what we're under here. Is this a time to accept money and to accept clothing? Elijah goes on, olive orchards and vineyards and sheep and oxen and male and female slaves. Therefore the leprosy of Naaman shall cling to you and to your descendants forever. So he left his presence leprous, as white as snow. And that's why we think it might have been vitiligo, because it announces that the leprosy was this whiteness that came over him. So like I said, greed is what happens, and it kind of has a cool twist, right? The blessing that Elijah was to receive, Gehazi tried to take, and he ended up instead with the curse that Naaman had removed. How about that for kind of a reversal of everything? And the commentators pointed out something that I probably didn't notice, but that Naaman uses language that's not inclusive, which is an important part of this story, the inclusivity, right? That this foreigner, this great man that shouldn't even be within the radar of God as far as we understand God. God does all these acts in order to bring him to faith and to lift him up. And Gehazi yet though doesn't see him as a brother or sister of the faith. Right. What goes around comes around. That's so true, Lois. So Gehazi says Aramean Naaman off too lightly, right? He's not even just Naaman or General Naaman or Lord Naaman even to give him a sign of respect. He's the Aramean. And then you also see just the classic biblical story, because it's the classic human story, right? That our lives just keep building up, stacking up, one after another, after another, after another, after another. And that's what happens with lies. And I know you and I have all been involved in this stack, right? Where we rationalize that this would be the right thing to do, and suddenly we had to lie to this person in order not to admit that what we did, and we got to lie to that person and this person, and before you know it, we can hardly keep all these lives straight. So there you go. And then finally, one of the commentators pointed out, for a new convert like Naaman, Gehazi just really puts a bad light on the faith. And what does that do for all of us when we put a bad light on the faith for people around us that have come to Jesus? So, good things to think about. I'm going to pick out some of these discussion classes. I went through that half hour. So that's the scripture part. I want to get up some of the discussion, which is a little harder on this. So we're going to have some blank sort of downtime right now as I wait for you people to share with me what you're thinking. And I'm going to go down to this one. This idea of God's centrality in our lives, right? Because Naaman's quandary seems to be all of our quandary. How do we balance our service to God and our service to whoever else claims us? And a lot of other people claim each of us, right? How do I worship God when my work demands my presence on Sunday morning? How do I keep my baptismal promises for my children when confirmation's at the same time as basketball practice or baseball practice? How do I honor my neighbor when my work demands that I fleece my neighbor by selling him this great used car, you know? These were the questions that the Corinthians had in Paul's letter. This is what Paul's letter is about, is trying to make God central in our lives when we've already got so many other things that are central in our life. So, because what it's going to mean is that some loyalty's got to die in order for this new loyalty that's been given to us in the waters of baptism to rise up. And that's what Naaman hasn't even left the soil of Israel, and he already realizes that, this is going to be a problem when I get back. And too often, I think, and maybe most often, for all of us, God isn't so much at the center of our life as God is a part of our life. In fact, usually people say something like, the three most important things to me are God, family, and country. And there's probably very few of us that's really even true. The three most important things are probably self, maybe family, and then money. And then God and country kind of fly in there in and out. And finally, Elijah's shalom doesn't give an answer to any of this. Like I said when we were talking about it up there, it's just an encouragement for us to go and figure it out. So what do you think about that? What are the loyalties that you might struggle with? What's the wisdom that you've received maybe? What are your ideas about that? Do you think this is still a problem for us, or do you think this was just a 5th century BCE problem and no longer a 21st century problem? What do you think? Is it easy from the waters of baptism to keep God at the center of your lives, and what do you need to do in order to do that? So if you got any thoughts on that, type them up, and we'll talk about them. Okay. And while you're typing, I'll put one for me personally, and that would be my family. I think my family often gets in the way of making God at the center of my life, and you can rationalize that because you're doing things because your mother needs them to do, or because your wife demands this of you, or your children need that, but often those things that you're rationalizing are things that where God is saying, I don't really think that's how I envision you, Carl. That's not my hope for you. So I think I definitely would struggle with that. Okay, I'm reading Harold's right here. Yeah, so Harold's lifting up in his response that sometimes we make decisions based on we make compromises. Like if we can't do, we got to work, and if we got to work, is there another way to worship? And if there's not another way to worship, can I help my church figure out how to help me worship? And I've had people come to me and ask me to start Wednesday night services for that reason, where they're working with me, trying to figure out how to worship. And the other thing Harold lifts up is sometimes you just got to make decisions. Is baseball going to be, is baseball going to keep me from this or not? Yeah, Becky says that she's growing into it, that it's becoming easier for her. That's wonderful, Becky. But it's not easy. And Becky's got 2 boys, so she has my sympathy, because if you have children now, there's all sorts of competition for your children's attention away from church and your baptismal promises. So she's in the midst of that battle. Great, Becky. No, Lois is slowing down. The decision-making process. That does sound like some wisdom, Lois. Where you're trying to discern what does God want of me. Maybe it is the best thing for me to do to miss church today and spend this Sunday with my mother, right? Maybe it is the best decision to skip this Hooligan group, Lois, and minister to my daughter, right? To kind of stop. Harold said pray about it, but yeah, stop and think. Maybe you're missing something. Hey, Patsy, welcome. Yeah, Harold. I'm never thinking that we get wiser as we get older. That's just because I'm 56 and I haven't seen it happen to me yet. So maybe some of you got that one nailed, but I hear wisdom from the children and youth around here just as much as from my older people around here. Yeah, Kathy, you got a really good point there. Kathy says that Naaman realized that God was different than these other gods that he'd been a part of. And maybe that realization has to be kind of central to putting God at the center of our lives, What a friend of mine used to say to me was that if I really believe what I said I believe, then I would do this. And that's what I hear in that, Kathy, right? I mean, if I'm really going to accept that there's this creator God that created me and called me beloved, right? Creator God created me and called me beloved. Then of course I'm going to yoke myself to that God and that God's wishes. But if I don't really believe that, and I don't really, then I think you've opened yourself up to making all sorts of other decisions. I like that, Kathy. That's really good. Thank you. Another mother with boys too, just like Becky. Stacy Stout put up a comment there. Where these are real decisions that the parents of our congregation constantly have to do, and I will lift up Stacy and Becky as two examples that do this wonderfully. And she talks about how to bring God in the midst of those activities that have to take her out of the church and into the world. And how do we witness this to our kids, right? Our priorities. Which was when my kids were in swimming, just like Stacy's kids are in swimming. You have these long weekend meets, and so and so we would make compromises where we wouldn't go to some meets and we would go to other kind of meets. So we would do those compromises in a way. I'm not saying that they're what God hoped, but at least we would do them in a way where the whole family was kind of in on the decision and said it, and thought that this is why we're doing it. So I do appreciate that, Stacy. I never even thought about having a short little worship service at the swim meet itself. In the midst of it, I don't know if I would have had the courage to do something like that to draw attention to myself like that. I think I might have lacked that courage. Yeah, little eyes are always watching. Yeah, our children learn from us, whether not necessarily what we're saying, but what we're doing. That's wonderful too. Great. Yeah. Well, hear me clearly. I'm going to steal Eliza's words right here and just say, go in peace, brothers and sisters. Don't beat yourself up that you're screwing it up. Just do your best and ask God for forgiveness when you fail, because we will fail. We all will. So go in peace. I really like that part of this story. Oh, you're back at that mission site. Good deal, Patsy. Good deal. You stay down there. It's really cold up here, so you stay down here. But I'm glad that the internet allows you to be part of us today. That's for sure. Tell Lyric I said hi. Okay, the other one is one that Lois brought up too, the talismans idea, right? That Naaman needed that soil for his faith to be real. And at first thought I read that, God, what an idiot, right? I mean, you're bringing back soil. Okay, Eliza, tell him about this. God doesn't need to be worshipped like that. And But, Elijah doesn't do that. He just lets it go. And then I got to thinking, what a jerk I am to be lifting that up like that. I mean, I have tangible objects that draw me closer to God. Often they're kind of significant presence. I have this real ugly rock that I keep on my desk at home that used to have paint on it, but over the years the paint's worn off. And I want you to tell me if you've got any tangible objects that help you in your connection with God. As I tell you about this one, and the rock was given me by a guy named Steve, who I actually met again when he was like 30 because of a member of the church knew him and lived and blah blah blah. So, but I hadn't seen him when he was 14. But Steve had some, maybe it was on the spectrum. Maybe that's what it is. Some autism, and but he connected with me in a way that I was always surprised by. And he found this rock when he was like 12 or 13 or something like that, and he painted it and he wrote peace on it. And I think he misspelled peace too. And he gave it to me, and it was just such a cool connection between pastor and child, and I was the youth minister, so and it lifted up for me the presence of God in the midst of this community that I was pastoring at that point, and I've kept it on my desk every time, and sometimes when I'm anxious, I pick up that rock and I hold it in my hand and I feel it, and I think about that faith of Steve that kind of witnessed to me the power of faith that overcomes all the barriers that we think we have around us. So, oh, Kathy has a worry stone. Lois has a dove feather. A long story, right? I mean, I got the option where I get to talk, so yeah, I don't blame me not wanting to type that out. Okay, I have a little stone with the word gratitude engraved on it. I like that. If you come in my office, you'll see all sorts of pictures that are hanging on here, and almost all of them are presents from various people of faith that have gathered around me and encouraged me. And so those kind of tangible things remind me of the community that I'm a part of. I think probably most of the objects are reminding me of the community that I'm a part of and that I've been called to be a part of, because you know me, community and faith is so important. Anyone get tied to things that they've had to let go? And here's what I'm thinking right now. I hate to give you what I'm thinking, because I don't want to give you like the right answer. But I often find this in churches when people get tied to the building too carefully, too closely, right? When we remodeled in 202, and whenever we remodeled the sanctuary, one of the things we did was we changed the color of the carpeting from red to blue. And actually, people didn't freak out, right? But I was convinced that people were going to freak out because, the carpet of that carpet had been red since since the beginning of time. I mean, we just randomly changed it from red to blue, and actually Lois, who's involved here, was part of that. It was part of that working, because we had red pews and we wanted to kind of set it off, and water, and so this whole idea of this flowing of water to the baptismal font. And if you notice, our baptismal font has the tile that's going over it sits right there at the base of this, so this river of water comes through. I mean, we did it intentionally. We did it for great reasons. We had great people like Lois and others involved with it, but I really thought people would freak out because it wasn't red, and people didn't. They didn't. But that's the kind of thing I'm wondering. Do you ever get tied to stuff where you go, okay, you know what? This is distracting me from my faith, not keeping me from my faith. If there's any of those. Yeah, well, it wasn't read in 1958, Kathy. It was read in 1968. I think is when they built the church. But 1958 is, or maybe in 56, right, is when we were founded, and 58 was probably when we built the first sanctuary. I think is what it. And I think when you built the first sanctuary, it was linoleum that was on the floor in there. In the first sanctuary. So it took us a while to get to red floors, but by 1968 you were fully there, I think, when you built the sanctuary. Yeah. So I would lift that up. I would lift up that, at times there's just things that you need to let go. the church doesn't have to be like this. That worshiping God doesn't have to be like this. That expressing God doesn't have to be like that. Yeah, I'm gonna do one more of these. Oh, Becky's got one. Oh, that's wonderful that you've kept your Bible from a youth gathering in 1997. It's horrible that you were at a youth gathering in 1997, and I already had 3 kids and one of them near graduation. So that's the part that makes me sad of that story, Becky. but I can really see an old Bible. I actually use my old seminary Bible, which is all falling apart over there for kind of same reasons. It connects me. Uh, yeah, yeah. Harold. Those were good discussions. Harold says he was part of a church that had to disband because they'd gotten so small, and they had to figure out how to be church again. And those are good discussions for what is that makes us our church. If we lost 1200 Wagner Road, would Messiah still have an identity? Those are tough questions for a church. Oof. You know what? I think I'm done. I got a few more of these I could do, but it's 45 minutes, and that seems like a good amount of time. Um, so I think I'm going to leave it there and call it a day. Isn't that a great chapter? That is just a great chapter. I hope I hope this was helpful for you. It was fun for me to share it with you. If you still have a hankering for punishment, 7:00, I could send you a Zoom link for the Honoring Our Neighbor's Faith. We're going to be doing that. And at 7:00, we're going to do 2 Pentecostal churches that are local in the area. And those 2 Pentecostal churches are the Simple Church and Vineyard Community Church. And we're going to talk about the Pentecostal movement and kind of these local expressions that we have that are just wonderful churches in our community. So come back for that if you want to. If you don't want to do Zoom and you just want to be more passive, you can just watch that on Facebook page. Matt Thurston's going to help us put that on Facebook page. And both those pastors are going to speak to us for about 5 minutes each and help us. Okay. Yeah, I'll send you a link, Lois. Okay, guys. Thanks. I appreciate you. I will see you next week. Yeah, meaty chapter, I'll say. Bye-bye.